In every job description, there are a very limited number of events that are overrepresented in tragedy. And of the 1,000 things that a dispatcher does, of the 1,000 things that a jail deputy does, the 1,000 things that a patrol cop does, there's only about a dozen that are overrepresented downstream in our tragedy, our deaths, our injuries, our embarrassments, our indictments. In every job description, let's identify those and let's make every day a training day. That would be the ultimate goal.
San Diego 911 emergency. You need to come right away. There's a man with a gun and it's loaded. San Diego 911 emergency. You need to come right away. There's a man with a gun and it's loaded. Proceeding emergency signal from the Fort George 141. Proceeding emergency signal from the Fort George. All available units, roll code that way. All available units, roll code that way.
Now, my goal is to be the Robin Hood of public safety, taking wisdom from those that have it and giving it to those that need it. You. And kicking off season 1 is someone who I can remember from the very first time that I saw him teach. I can tell you when and where it was. My guest for this episode is the world famous Gordon Graham. And the first time I met Gordon, I was in DRE, Drug Recognition Expert School. Gordon came in and taught a 4-hour block, and I made a decision that day that anytime he was teaching, I was going to be there. He's impacted my life in so many positive ways, and quite frankly, like very few other people have been able to. Gordon has dedicated his efforts to providing the highest quality of training services available anywhere in the world. His programs have received international acclaim, and I can tell you personally, they are amazing. Gordon has expanded his operations from just lecture, and yes, I just air quoted for those of you listening to the podcast, to a lot of different other areas, including his commitment to firefighter safety. And as a former firefighter, I can tell you this one is important to me. You can view the efforts at firefighterclosecalls.com. And these links that I mentioned, these different websites, they'll be in the show notes. And if you're in public safety, please take a look at Lexipol, Lexipol.com, because this growing company has taken the concepts that Gordon has lectured on for decades and put those thoughts into a framework that can be applied to any public safety organization. Gordon's programs are in use around the world, and while he's received a lot of different accolades and awards, I was really impressed with him receiving the Presidential Award for Excellence. And that was presented to him by the International Association of Fire Chiefs in 2005. He also received the California Post Award for Lifetime Achievement in Law Enforcement. He got that in 2009. In 2015, he received the Lifetime Dedication Award from the International Public Safety Leadership and Ethics Institute. And in 2018, not that long ago, he received the James Oberstar Sentinel for Safety Award for his lifetime work in improving aviation safety internationally. And you thought he was just like a law enforcement trainer or just a firefighter training. He trains in every sector. It's amazing. So whether you're in the public or private sector, Gordon's programs work and work well. And should you need anything further, he says, please do not hesitate to contact him or his fantastic staff anytime. You and I are both very lucky to have Gordon give us his time, his wisdom, his insights. Would you please do me a favor? Hit the subscribe and the like buttons. Take a moment to leave a comment. Please list what takeaways you got from this episode, because that lets Gordon know what is drawing interest from people, and that lets him know where he's being helpful. So, without any further waiting, here's my hero, my mentor, my friend, Gordon Graham, and his take on training topics.
I am totally honored today to have Mr. Gordon Graham with us. And this man needs absolutely no introduction. If you have not heard of Gordon Graham, I don't know where you've been on this planet, but he is my hero. He's my mentor. He is just a wealth of wisdom. And as the Robin Hood of public safety, I can't talk today, where I'm taking wisdom from those who have it and giving it to those who need it. Gordon definitely has boatloads of wisdom. So Gordon, welcome to the show.
Mr. Robin Hood, good to see you, sir. Oh, I'm sorry, it's Carrie. How are you doing, sir?
I'll answer to a standard response. I'll answer to anything. Don't call me late for dinner.
Good.
So, so we start off the show talking about training, of which I know that's one of your favorite subjects. So tell me, what kind of challenges are we seeing in public safety, and what kind of solutions are there out there?
Well, I guess the big question here, and I ask this every time I give a lecture to cops, is after you graduate the academy, you get off probation. If you choose not to promote, when's the next time you got to take a serious test you have to study for? And the answer for most law enforcement agencies is we don't.
Yeah.
And that's troublesome. I don't want to make light of this, but in many states, the woman who does a woman's hair is required by the state to take a regular test to make sure she's got the necessary knowledge, skills, and abilities to do women's hair. Well, Gordon, that's a good rule. We don't want women's hair getting screwed up. We've got cops carrying guns with bullets who haven't been tested on the shooting policy since point of hire, driving 170-mile-an-hour Dodge Hemi Chargers, and they haven't been tested on the vehicle ops policy since point of hire. Fourth Amendment issues, Second Amendment issues. There are a limited number of things that continue to get us in trouble, and I fervently believe that in every job description, we need to identify what those events are, and those are the ones where we need to focus the training, and not just training. Now, having a piece of paper saying that somebody went to a class means nothing to me, and frankly, it means nothing to a jury downstream. It means nothing to our public. How do we really know what they know about this prior to their involvement in the incident? So the training and testing component is absolutely essential.
So what could, let's say there's a trainer out there that's wanting to make a difference with their agency. What would you suggest that they do to start to impact that problem?
Well, I would take a look at the current offerings on training. And frankly, for many training officers, their principal responsibility is making sure people go to a class, make sure they get signed in, make sure they get signed in. What did they really learn in that class, though? And so I guess the first step is identifying what we need to train on. And of course, that would include all of the things that are mandated by state law in the particular states that we're dealing with. There are some things that require ongoing training. But I want to have a cradle to end of career training, focusing on what I call the core critical tasks. In every job description, there are a very limited number of events that are overrepresented in tragedy. And of the 1,000 things that a dispatcher does, of the 1,000 things that a jail deputy does, the 1,000 things that a patrol cop does, there's only about a dozen that are overrepresented downstream in our tragedy, our deaths, our injuries, our embarrassments, our indictments. In every job description, let's identify those and let's make every day a training day. That would be the ultimate goal. Where to get started depends on your strength in the agency, depends on how much credibility you have with your bosses, depends on the ability of the bosses to deviate from what they've known for years. So there's a number of things that need to be done.
Okay, perfect. And just so you know, so I know in California, as an example, that because I'm on the quality assurance panel, so when we do a QAP audit of post courses, one of the things that we absolutely encourage as best practices is to have an exam, a meaningful exam at the end of the course. So would you recommend that people that are dealing with their individual state post begin to just incorporate that into their courses and just on their own, and also maybe at the different meetings that they have with their post coordinators, or any time the conferences that involve post, maybe bringing this up?
Absolutely. I guarantee you that downstream in court, whether it's state or federal, for that matter, even civil or criminal, but I really worry about the civil side for these purposes, the question's going to be posed to the chief, to the sheriff, to the defendant. When was the last time your employee was trained and tested on the shooting policy? When was the last time they were trained and tested on the pursuit policy?
Yeah.
And if your answer is, well, one time, in time, some time ago, and I see this on so many of these events where we talk to the people, well, the last time they were trained on it was at Point at Higher 15 years ago. That's not going to impress anybody. And forget the lawsuit, an officer gets killed or injured because they don't know the use of force policy. If you hesitate, that's problematic. People are dying because cops don't know the use of force policy. They don't understand these things. And it's not because they're bad people. I am firmly convinced that people do not start off their shift in law enforcement with the intent to do bad things.
Right.
That's very, very rare.
Yeah.
Most of it gets down to internal error, good people who make mistakes, particularly on that limited number of events that they don't experience every day, what I like to call those core critical tasks. We need to identify them. And from start a career at the academy, through the FTO process, through the initial training, through the ongoing training, through the daily training, the quarterly training, the annual training, whatever, we need to focus on those core critical tasks. And the only level of knowledge that's acceptable is 100%. You know, what's 70% mean to a jury downstream? It's okay to be wrong 3 times out of 10 on a decision to use deadly force.
Yeah.
80% is not much better. You know, we need to identify them. You know, Kerry, I've say this in class and people laugh at me. I want an annual test, part of their performance evaluation for every cop, for every dispatcher, for every jail deputy, for every trooper, for everybody, an annual test focusing on these core critical tasks, and the only acceptable level of knowledge on the test is 100%. And people look at me, Gordon, you're an idiot. You'll never get that past the union. Well, why don't we have the union help write the test?
Yeah.
Well, Gordon, if the union writes the test, then the employees will know the answers. Is it okay if they know the answers? You know, no, we're management. We must trick personnel at all costs. Those days are gone. Get together with the union, build a test, put the test on your intranet inside your department. Anybody can access that 24/7. The question, the answer, and the analysis of the answer. We've got good people who end up in big, big problems, death, injury, indictment, lawsuits, embarrassment, not because they're bad people, but because they weren't fully and adequately trained. And I'm fed up. You know, it's just, I don't want to come across as being Mr. Negative here, because the vast majority of things our people do around this great country, they're doing right. But when things don't go right, there are significant consequences. These are not surprises. These are not what we call the black swans. These are gray rhinos. They're identifiable risks. They're manageable risks. We can do something about this.
Your statement of, I don't want to come across as Mr. Negativity. Look, the only reason that somebody is as passionate as you are about this is because they truly care about it being a positive change. And when you identify something that needs to change and you have a solution for it, then yeah, and clearly you're passionate about it, and your heart's always been in this, and literally, I told you before, I can still remember the very first time I ever heard you talk, and you've been that way. You've been this passionate about these topics and this sort of thing since I first heard you. Gosh, 25 plus years ago.
Wow.
So yeah. So thank you for
law enforcement, and I hate to beat this phrase to death, the thin line, you know, the blue line, the green line, the gray line, whatever. It's the line between right and wrong, you know, and if we have cops who are not confident in being able to do their job, and there's a number of issues why they lack confidence these days, that's a huge problem lying in wait. And the ultimate loser is going to be the great people of this great nation of ours. And we've got to take this seriously.
Well, and it's also the fellow officers that lose.
Yep.
Yeah. When we talk about the core things that are the gray rhinos, as you so well put it, what is one thing? What would you tackle first from a training perspective? And what could, you know, because I told you before, we talked before we started this show, is that my thing is takeaways. So what's a takeaway that a patrol level deputy, a corrections, you know, a corrections officer who's rolling around the cell blocks, what would you recommend that they do to improve their training or their world in the area of training? What would you recommend that they do?
Well, what's the primary mission of everybody in public safety? Cops, firefighters, dispatchers, EMS, paramedics. You pick the profession. What's the primary mission? And when I teach line personnel, I ask that question: what is your primary mission? Primary mission of everybody in public safety is preservation of life. Preservation of life. So anything that focuses on preservation of life, use of force is clearly a preservation of life issue. Vehicle operations is a preservation of life issue. Barricaded suspects is a preservation of life issue. Police suicides is a preservation of life issue. We've got to preserve life. I read a study out of the UK where they and I'll probably misquote it greatly because I read what I wanted to read. But every 5 years, they asked cops over a 25-year window what their primary mission was. And it changed. When they were brand new, no, we're going to arrest bad people and take them to jail. And when they had 10 years on, the mission changed slightly. By the time they had 20 years on, they figured it all out. The primary mission is preservation of life. You know, now we can prioritize the preservation. And there are people out there who talk about that. It's a very difficult topic to talk about. You know, what's most important? Is it the victim? Is it the witness? Is it the cop? Is it the suspect? We can prioritize preservation of life, but anything dealing with preservation of life needs that constant ongoing training.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And having that training be validated is is a key thing that you were talking about, having it tested.
Yep.
You know, showing that you really did actually retain it. You know, one of the things that I've always said, Gordon, is that that's the true test of effective training is there a change in behavior? Well, part of that behavioral change can be shown through a test, and you have to have 4 components to training, and that is good content, accountability, and the accountability is the testing as far as I'm concerned, and whether or not, you know, of course, did they attend the training? Did they sign in? Were they there the whole time? But part of that accountability is the testing. Repetition and role play is another big one, that if all they have is lecture only, they're not getting good, effective training. So making sure that you have all 4 components of effective training is, I think, every training lieutenant's or training coordinator's role. And what I'm hearing you loud and clear is, let's make sure that on the accountability portion of that we actually have that in place.
Yes, I remember a quote from decades ago. What I read, I learn a little bit. What I hear, I learn a little bit more. What I practice, I learn the most. And I'm a big fan of repetition. Repetition, repetition, repetition. I think adults learn much better by repetition than they do immersion. So immersing a person in a class is one issue, but that constant ongoing repetition. And when people wonder why I say the same thing over and over again in my live lectures, you know, predictable is preventable. Predictable is preventable. You know, if they hear that often enough, it'll become something they will remember and they will practice. And I cannot tell you how many times people see me in the mall, hey, predictable is preventable. Predictable is preventable. They remember that, and that makes me feel good.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And it does sink in. I mean, it even sunk into my thick head. And, you know, I still remember one of the times that I saw you talk. I had worked a graveyard shift the night before, came and sat in your class all day, and was going back to work another graveyard shift. And that still sunk in. So your methods do work, that's for sure.
We'll carry along that line there. And I know you're going to edit this and figure out how to make this thing work the best. But what the heck are we doing scheduling a graveyard cop
right
on training the next day?
I totally.
Your dog tired.
Yeah. Well, and I agree. And I, in that particular instance, my supervisor at the time would not give me the time off.
Yep.
Now, there was another time that I came and saw you talk that my supervisor would not give me the time off, and I was able to get, you know, I used my personal vacation time just to be able to see you. You were in San Diego at that time. You were presenting for the sheriff's department, and I crashed their training to be able to see you talk. But
thank you for that. But
you're welcome. But in that case, I was willing to, you know, but it cost me the equivalent of a day's pay to be able to come to that training. In the case, yes, you're absolutely right. Going back to your point of why do we schedule the graveyard training? Now, in that particular case, that was the only time you were available. Would have been nice if they'd had you at nighttime.
Well, it's not the only time I was available, because I am the only speaker that I know that teaches on a 24-hour clock. You know, and I've always offered that. If you need the class, you know, the most expensive part about training is not paying me to come in. The most expensive part of training is the butts in the seat.
Yeah.
So you've got 50 cops there at $500 a day total pay package. There's $25,000 sitting there. And if they're not learning anything, we're throwing that money away.
Yep.
So I've always said, if you need the class from midnight till 8 a.m., I'll teach from midnight to save you the overtime. and to put it inside their cycle of sleep, where they actually are awake because that's the hours they normally work.
Yeah.
And, and again, Terry, in my little world, I'm nobody, but I figured that out when I was brand new. Why is training an 8 to 5 component when people are working at nights? Why do I disrupt a sleep cycle? Why do I have to pay overtime to make this person go to training? If we schedule all 25 of those deputies for daytime, now it's time and a half. So you've got $37,500. I know I did it quickly. I went to Catholic school. $37,500 of overtime to listen to somebody when I will do it. Well, no, I'm sorry, Gordon. We don't train at nighttime.
Yeah.
Why? Well, we've never done anything like that before. Years ago, I can remember the CDC, the California Department of Corrections, and they got in trouble they had a policy that on any disturbance in the yard, they would shoot to kill.
I remember that.
And I could be wrong on that, but that was the takeaway I got.
Really familiar. That's what I got from it too.
Yeah, it was sad. So then they did it. It ended up being a very, very bad policy. But then we learned what? That the only training they'd ever have on using the rifle was during daylight hours on level ground at paper targets. I'm not a shooter, but I know people who are shooters. There is a whole world of difference between shooting from an elevated post at nighttime than there is shooting from the ground level during daytime. And why are we doing this? Well, Gordon, we've always done it this way. Status quo. One of the rules I keep on preaching is we've got to look for new and better ways. Our public deserves better than minimum standards. Our people deserve better than minimum standards. Our profession deserves better than minimum standards. We've got to be looking for the next best way. Well, Gordon, we've always done it this way. It's nightmarish to me that we're locked into this insane thing that we don't train during the hours we work.
Excellent point, and a great way to finish up the block for the Tactical TLC on training. And what I'd like to do next is I'm going to have you shift gears just a little bit, and we're going to shift into leadership. So
nice segue. And don't interrupt me, because I'm going to tell you nice segue. We chatted about this in the preparing for this, but the difference between management and leadership. And let's use the segue that we just had. The manager will say, you know what, we're going to schedule the training for 8 to 5, even though we know that people have worked all night long, but we train from 8 to 5. The leader will say, no, this is the way we're going to do it. The manager will follow the existing policy. They will, do what they're told to do. The leader will say, is there a better way to do this? Is there a better way to do this? More strategic thinking than operational thinking.
Yeah, and I think that's an excellent point that you draw, just as a easy to figure out, and you're giving us a takeaway right from the very beginning. And I look for a takeaway in every block. But the ability to figure out internally, doing that self-check, am I coming from a management point of view, or am I coming from a leader point of view? Am I managing, or am I leading? And you just gave it. Are you managing just because you're using we've always done it this way, and you can't think outside of that limitation, that outside of that box? Or are you figuring out what is going to be most effective, what's going to be the best use of the learning opportunity for your people, and what's going to serve the public and your staff best?
Well, I'm not a leader because I'm only a line employee. I'm only a dispatcher, so I'm not a leader. I'm only a street cop, so I'm not a leader.
What do you say to them about that?
I said, and that's the feeling. One of my pet peeves is some of the brightest people in every given law enforcement agency are at the line level. They have chosen not to promote because they love what they do. And there is this perception among many people inside and outside of our profession that if you don't carry rank, obviously you're not a bright person. Nothing could be further from the truth. Some of the smartest people I have met in law enforcement, some of the great thinkers, are at the lowest levels of the organization. Now, they might not consider themselves a leader, but other people recognize them as the leader. They're the leader, and they understand what's going on. I think I talked to you about this the other day, that too many people think that they're synonyms. If I look up management, I'm going to get a synonym for leadership. No, you won't. It's apples and oranges. Management is operational. Leadership is strategic. Got to be thinking.
Yeah. Those are black swans and gray rhinos.
Yeah.
To use your analogy from earlier. So the informal leader, I think that, and you and I, we sat there in your living room the other day and we were talking, and we talked about when a new supervisor comes on. You have a fire captain that now has a new crew. They're going to have an informal leader that's there who can provide super valuable information and influence the way things go from then on out. And if they don't recognize that you come in as a person of rank, I don't care whether you're a sergeant or a fire captain or any rank, if you don't recognize that you have the informal leaders there already, you're walking in blind. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you've got to identify those people up front. And I don't want to use the word co-opt, but you've got to get their line of thinking, what they think, so that you can, make your message compatible, consistent, complementary to what their feelings are about these issues. And just one little inappropriate word, one little inappropriate comment can lose that leadership support. I'll tell you something very funny that happened early on in my career. And I'll say the guy's name. He's deceased now. He was a sergeant on the CHP, a guy named Russ Partridge. And a nice enough guy. He was a professional volleyball player before he came on the highway patrol. And he was a sergeant. And I'm nobody. I'm a motorcycle cop, and I'm just trying to do my job, 70s. And he comes up to me and he says, Gordon, I need to talk to you. I said, about what, Sarge? And he says, do you recognize what an informal leader you are on the California Highway Patrol? And, I'm thinking, I'm nobody. And I said, pardon? He says, I've been talking to other cops, and I'm telling you, Gordon, they really look up to you as an informal leader on the CHP. And I'm there thinking, man, I didn't know that. I had no clue. And I said, well, thanks, Sarge. He says, it's not one, it's not two, but several cops look at you as an informal leader. I said, well, thanks, Sarge. Well, Gordon, with that in mind, I've got an opening on the Occupational Safety Committee, and I am hopeful that you'll take this position on the Area Occupational Safety Committee. Holy moly, I'm an informal leader, and they want me on the Occupational Safety Committee? I'm the happiest guy in the world. My God, I just thought I was a regular old motorcycle cop. I am somebody. So I get home that night. This is long before I'm married. Get home, my roommate, another CHP officer. I said, hey, Mike, guess what? Sergeant Partridge called me in, and guess what? I'm going to be on the Occupational Safety Committee. And he says, oh, Gordon, don't tell me you fell for that crap about you being an informal leader. and I, what? He goes, he says that all the time because nobody wants to be on occupational safety. I remember that to this day. And sadly, I've used that line with people also.
Oh, too funny.
Yeah.
Too funny. Well, so if you are that leader on your ambulance crew, your EMS unit, your fire unit, your police unit, whatever agency you're working for, what words of wisdom would you have for them to be able to, because they're a leader, and what would you say when they're being supervised by a manager? Putting you on the spot here.
Well, the key is, I think the true leadership is practice what you preach. You want to lose your crew, you want to lose your audience immediately, say one thing and behave a different way. I can recall people talking ethics, giving us an ethics class, and they were the most unethical people I've ever met. We don't take free meals, we don't do this. Yeah, you do. Yeah, you do. Or we treat people with dignity and respect. You don't. You have zero credibility. Yeah. So if you're that company officer on the fire service, or the sergeant in a law enforcement agency, or the supervising dispatcher, and you want people to follow your lead, set the proper example, practice what you preach, be real. I think the word here is authenticity. Authenticity. And I think I mentioned to you a great book about George Washington, and what you can lead through fear. That doesn't work. Well, he's sociable, therefore he's a leader. That doesn't work. He's likable. That doesn't work. Yeah. That person who is relentless, who is authentic, who is genuine, who loves what they do, and they exude that, those are the people that get followed.
Yeah. Yeah,
And I
I
think
would
another
agree
word
with
in there is be humble. I remember Schwarzkopf at the end of the Gulf War, and I think the university will say he did a phenomenal job. And they said, "What a phenomenal job you did." And you know what his response was? "I was just the next general up. Any general in the United States Army could have done it the same way." You know, I listened to a Sullenberger give a talk once. So what a fantastic job. Any pilot could have done it the exact same way, you know, and praising the crew, you know, for all their support. And I'm not being rude here, but what did the crew do? This is the guy that landed that thing in the Hudson, you know, and he's giving credit to the crew. They will follow that person forever, forever. I look at some of these bosses who never go to the range. They never go to the range because now I'm the chief of police. I'm the sheriff now. I don't have to go to the range anymore. What happens when the superintendent of your organization, the colonel, the chief, shows up at the range and outshoots everybody, you know, and takes the gun cleaning seriously, doesn't have somebody else clean the gun, walks around and says hi to people, gives them little points of improvement on how to do a little bit better, you know, that's the leader, you know, not the person who's operational, just doing what they're told to do, but really improving the quality of the individual and the quality of the organization. And if we had more people like that, which brings me into another one of our pet peeves, my pet peeves, who are our FTOs? Who are the FTOs? You know, I talk to doctors about nursing babies. Is it better to be breastfed or is it better to be on the bottle? You know, and there's all sorts of nature versus nurture issues going on here. But I've known women who could only breastfeed for a very short period of time rather than the full term, and they had to go to the bottle for a number of medical issues. Mm-hmm. And when I asked doctors that question, they said, it's the first day is really what's most important. That transfer the first day is important. Everything after that's nice, but those initial transfers of the nutrients are the critical thing. The FTO process. Who do we select to be our FTOs? Who selects the field training officers? Yeah. Well, you know, he's a hard-charging guy. He goes out there, writes a lot of tickets, takes a lot of people to jail. No-nonsense guy. Is that really the ideal person we want being the FTO? Here's this person, brand new, fresh out of the academy, who really wants to do this job, fresh out of the fire academy, fresh out of the police academy, who wants to be that screaming professional, and they run into some guy who has race issues or LBTQ, GQ. Fix me on this one when you get that.
I'll do that. I'll put it in. I'll put like a lower third in for you.
Yeah. You know, issues with sex orientation, issues with national origin, issues with excessive force, issues with we can take shortcuts on policies and procedures. You know, this guy blew a .20, so don't write down that he only hit the lane line. Write down that he went 1 foot over the lane, because that's what 2.0s do. No. That's not the truth. And right. The second a trainee hears that, one of two things is going to happen. The rarity is the trainee's going to say, I'm sorry, that's incorrect. The more likely outcome is, well, that's the way we do business. And then the slippery slope where we start taking shortcuts. And it's just the kiss of death.
Yeah, and I would agree with you on that. In fact, having taught at our FTO Academy here in San Diego and the refresher, the block that I loved more than anything to teach was the teaching and training techniques block. And it was only 4 hours out of the entire academy. And I've always thought that was odd, is like, why do we take the most important skill or set of skills an FTO can have, and out of 24 hours, it's 4. We spend as much time on liability as we do training techniques. And that's just wrong.
Yep.
In my book. And the reason is because the FTO needs to be able to understand, I have this wisdom, they're the Robin Hood in the car, and they need to take steal the wisdom from themselves and pass it along in a way that the trainee actually wants to learn, and the trainee can actually retain that information. And the FTOs, I think even more than sergeants, I think the FTOs are truly almost as impactful on a law enforcement agency. And, your new firefighters, when they're coming out, that first crew that they're put with
absolutely
really sets the tone for the rest of their career.
Absolutely it does. And going back to the breastfeeding example, it's only short in duration, but that can impact the rest of your career, whether it's 1 day or 2 days where we can transfer the nutrients, and then have to go to the bottle. That initial transfer is the key. What are they immersed into? And if they come into a fire station where inappropriate behavior is allowed, where the captain is not running a tight ship, where people are allowed to bring girlfriends in or drinking on duty, that's just wrong-headed thinking, and that'll poison them for the rest of their career.
Yeah, and the same for a medic when they're depending who they're put with, as both proctors and also just for new partners.
Yep.
That's super critical decision making. So,
and not to be redundant, but here we go again: preservation of life.
Right.
That has got to be the theme from the academy through the initial training process, the ongoing. What's the most important thing we do? Preservation of life. Anything short of that is secondary. We've got to worry about the preservation of life. Our lives, our public's lives, that's the key component here.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on that. So, Gordon, what do you see as the challenges that are being faced by public safety, fire, EMS, law enforcement, in the areas of communication, and what ideas do you have to improve in that area?
The two concerns I have are silos and the dangers of silos, and number two, institutional knowledge, and where we are not tapping into this massive bank of institutional knowledge that we have. So let's start with silos. What do we learn after September 11th? The CIA knew this, ATF knew this, the FBI knew this, the DEA knew this, another federal agency knew this, but nobody was comparing notes because knowledge is power. I'm going to hold on to that. And one of the big goals after September 11th was to try to break down the silos. And in talking to my federal counterparts, and I know many of them, nothing's changed. Nothing's changed. Knowledge is power. We're going to hold on to it. We've got to figure out a way to break down the silos. There was a sergeant in my office, be very, very blunt. The captain would hand out things for sergeants to read. That sergeant would hold on to it and not pass it on to any other sergeant, so that sergeant was the only person who knew what the captain wanted. I've got the knowledge, therefore I've got the power, and these silos, we're going to hold on to this. We're not going to share it. We're going to get the credit for this. That's just the kiss of death in an organization. We've got to figure out a way to break down the silos. Number two, the institutional knowledge. Anytime I address a group of cops, I make this statement. Individually, you know a lot. Collectively, this group knows just about everything, and we are hesitant to ask because asking a question is a sign of being stupid, a sign of being weak. No, it's not. It's a sign of being smart. What's stupid is doing something when you had the time to ask the question and you failed to ask the question. As I often say in my classes, there's two types of events: no time to think and time to think. Non-discretionary time, discretionary time. On the ones that give us no time to think, those require the constant ongoing training that we talked about earlier. On the ones that give us time to think, slow down, slow down. Two great books I've read. Blink by Gladwell. The brain gives you the unique ability to look at something and make a split-second decision. Shortly after I read Blink, I read a great book by Dr. Michael Legault called Think. And essentially what he says is, I agree with Gladwell. The brain gives you the unique ability to make split-second decisions. Why do it if you don't have to? If you have time to think, use it. Find the person who's got the knowledge. Collectively, this group knows everything. Ask. That's not a sign of being stupid. Well, I don't want to ask. I don't want people to think I'm weak. No, you're not being weak. You're being smart. Share that knowledge with somebody else. Maybe you've never handled this type of domestic violence call. You've got people separated. You've got them hooked up. There's time to think before you start doing other things. Slow down. You got a barricaded suspect. Slow down. You don't have to act. How's the best way to handle this thing? Think. And tap into this institutional knowledge. And there's so many different things that I have in my head regarding how we can share this institutional knowledge. The best of the best. Identify the women and men who are the 10%ers, not the 10% who don't care. Not the 10% who, well, I'll do what I'm told to do, but the 10% that we have identified earlier as the leaders, the people who really care, who really want to make a difference. Let's identify them in every job description. Know who they are. And before they separate from the organization, retirement, let's capture what they know. Mary, John, you've done patrol work, you've done jail work, you were a supervisor for 3 years. In this last year, would you please consider the three most important things you did? on patrol operations, in jail operations, as a supervisor, how you handled the task that night, that day, and now that you've had time to think it through, how would you do it better next time? How would you do it better next time? Capture that before they leave. And every time we start a training class, let's put in one of these 2-minute little vignettes on, hey, my name's Mary Smith, and I'm separated from San Diego Sheriff's Office. I did 10 years in patrol, I did 6 years in the jail as a supervisor, and I did 3 years in investigations. And I've been asked to share some things with you. Let me tell you the most important thing I learned on patrol. And, you know, one day we came on this naked guy that was acting crazy, and at the time I did this, this, and this, but in retrospect, it would have been a lot smarter if I would have done this, this, and this. And that's my little hint to help you improve your operations. If we had all the smart people in law enforcement doing this, you know, man, we could improve the quality of our profession. We're throwing away too much institutional knowledge.
Yeah, and you just, corporate, in the corporate world, a lot of companies do exit interviews. When they have an employee who's leaving to go to another company or maybe even change careers, whatever they're doing, they're leaving the company. They almost always have an exit interview. And ultimately, that's what you're talking about doing. And sometimes an officer, a firefighter, or medic leaves without much notice. You know, hey, I'm suddenly retiring, or they've been out on medical, industrial leave, and all of a sudden they're retiring out of that. And you might not have an opportunity to capture that institutional knowledge, as you called it. But for the most part, people know when they're going to retire. And to be able to do that would be hugely valuable. I know even as a senior officer, I would love to listen to, you know, I one of the guys that I used to work with, literally today was his last day. He retired after 28 years. I'm not quite retired yet. I would still, even though I don't have much longer before I retire, I would still love to hear what Jeff had to say, because I know that guy has a lot of experience. He remained a police officer his entire career. He never promoted to detective or sergeant or anything else. But he's got so much street cred, it's crazy. And I would love to hear his pearls of wisdom. I don't care if I have 3 days left on the department. That's 3 days worth of knowledge from him that I can put into action, or at least take into consideration. So
I have friends on the Bureau who told me about FBI agents who retired on September 7th, 2001. Friday, September 7th. 4 days later, September 11th happens. They went back to headquarters, back to their FBI building, and said, how can I help? I'm sorry, you don't have a clearance. Excuse me. They've got all this institutional knowledge, and you don't want to listen to them. You know, I had a sergeant, greatest sergeant in the history of the CHP. The guy leaves. The guy retires. He gave plenty of notice. He retires. When's the next time the CHP has contact with him? Funeral? All that institutional knowledge is out there. I have a whole hour I talk about on bringing back the best of the best. Bring them back to help train, mentor, and develop the newest generation of supervisors. The newest generation. Well, Gordon, technology's changed. The laws have changed. The basic principles of supervision are forever in time. And this person has nailed it. They've got the memory markers. They got the behavioral scripts. They got the mental models. They got the experience. And we don't even listen to what these people have to say.
Now, some agencies, San Diego PD as an example, and I know San Diego Sheriff does the same thing. They bring them back as what they call retired annuitants. So these retired officers, lieutenants, sergeants, you know what a lot of them are doing is they're processing background applicants, which is good in the sense that they have some input into who we're hiring and helping screen them with their knowledge. But there's a lot of their knowledge in other areas that's not being tapped.
Yep.
And they're being paid to come in back to the department. They want to be part of the family, and the city is welcoming them back, or the county is welcoming them back. I think that's an amazing idea. So again, I always look for a takeaway for every block, and for this communication block is being able to take that institutional knowledge of the people that have it and find a way to communicate it to the people that need it. You're listening to this Tactical TLC podcast for exactly that reason. You're watching these videos on YouTube or on Facebook for exactly that reason, because people like Gordon have the knowledge that you want. So I would say that very easily, and then we're not even done talking yet about communication, but obviously this is a great takeaway already where you can go to your agency. I don't care whether you're a fire department, EMS, law enforcement agency, and start figuring out a way where you could do at least exit interviews, or people who are retired annuitants, people who are coming back to work after they're retired and they're working a certain number of years, and being able to capture their knowledge, even in just 1 or 2 minutes. Now, Gordon, you do the Lexapol weekly tip, your tip of the week, which I absolutely love those. They're simple, short, easily digestible, quick. It just literally, I see the email command. I'm like, oh, what's Gordon have to say today? And I almost picture a format like that.
Certainly. Why not? Why not? I don't have all the knowledge. I'm trying to share what I know, but I know that collectively, the group that I'm talking to knows a lot more than I'll ever know.
Yeah.
Let's capture that knowledge and share it with others. I've had a law practice now for 36 years. There's 1 million cops in this country, round figures. There's 1 million firefighters in this country, round figures. Who do you think shows up in my law office more frequently, cops or firefighters? I'm equally popular in both worlds. Who shows up more frequently? Cops, 50-1. Why? Firefighters learn collectively. Everything they do as a team. Cops, we learn individually. We pick up something on this domestic violence call. Wow, I didn't know that. We pick up something on this traffic collision where the tow truck driver is pulling the vehicle up the side of the hill and the cable snaps and it whips around and it rips the mirror off the tow truck. And the cop's standing on the other side and says, whoa, I learned something. Where do they go next? They go to their next call. They go to their next call. For the supervisor who's watching this, why don't you spend some time at the end of the shift? Remember what we call briefing, debriefing? We brief at the start of the shift. Why don't we debrief at the end of the shift? Mary, did you learn anything today? You had that domestic violence call up there. What did you learn? Tom, what did you learn on that traffic collision? Did you pick up anything? If they say no, then it's no. Occasionally, you know what I did learn? I learned this, this, and this. Share with the group. And the big takeaway that I want people to know is slow down. Not everything needs to be done now. Most things give you time to think. If you have it, use it. I am very, very familiar with a case involving a small department outside of Denver, Colorado. And they did a phenomenal job, Greenwood Village, Colorado, a phenomenal job. And there was a lawsuit that came out of it, a federal lawsuit. And the judge looked at the thinking process of the involved people. And the judge said, how can you possibly say they were reckless? They considered everything. They did this, they did this, they did this. And the judge listed over this 18-hour event exactly what the cops did to try to preserve life, and every step they took in terms of his demands and bringing in the girlfriend and bringing in the ex-wife and letting him talk to his mom and letting him have some food and letting him have this and not shutting down. And the federal court judge, a very well-reasoned decision, said, and you want me to say this was reckless behavior? We need to think, slow down and think things through, be deliberative. I watch SWAT cops. Do they want to speed things up or slow things down? Their whole mission is let's slow it down, and anything we can to avoid using deadly force, we'll use any option. That's the last resort. Contrary to everything you see on TV about SWAT cops, and we're going to be doing this, and no. The real good ones, and I know a lot of them. How can we slow this thing down? Maybe something else will happen when we slow down because we don't want to have to do this.
Yeah, excellent points and excellent takeaways as well. I really like that. I just love the wisdom that you have and how you share it. So thank you for that. So let me ask you this. I know that people in the fire world, people in the EMS and law enforcement world, most of them know you, as they well should. But for anybody who doesn't happen to know who Gordon Graham is, why don't you tell us how they can learn more about you, how they can follow you, how they can get your tip of the week, maybe as one example.
The easiest way is Lexapol.com, Lexipol.com. I, along with Bruce Pratt, had an idea 20 years ago to standardize policies, procedures, and training in California law enforcement. And today I'm happy to say that better than 2/3 of the states today have the Lexapol knowledge management system, 2 basic principles of risk management, Standardize your best practices, back it up with constant ongoing training. And when you access lexipol.com, you've got my tips of the day there. They're free. There's no charge. You don't have to be a member to do this. Drag down to presentations, drag down to webinars. I've got some of the best and brightest people in American law enforcement today on these webinars, and they're all yours for free. My goal is improving the quality of our profession, where excellence is the norm, not the deviation. We got to get better and better and better at what we do. And remember, the overall goal for all of us in public safety is preservation of life. And at the end of your career, you'll be able to say, you know what, I did good. I did good. And that's what I'm looking for.
Well, you certainly put things in place that allow that to happen. And what's needed now is for people to take advantage of the things that you've put into place. People need to implement those things. They need to adopt those principles. So as you're listening to this show, whether it's a podcast or watching it on a video, check out Gordon Graham. If you haven't heard about him, you need to soak in his wisdom, because he takes the far side of complexity and makes it simple. Makes it simple to understand, simple to retain, simple to implement. And I tell you what, Gordon Graham has gold, and a lot of it is out there for free. And if you're a training coordinator, get a hold of him and get him out to your agency, because he's not going to be around forever. And eventually, at some point, he's going to want to take a long vacation with his beautiful wife. And I can tell you, having met his wife, he's a smart man to spend time with her. So I want to thank you again, Gordon, for being here, honoring us with your time, honoring us with your wisdom. And I just thank you.
You're very kind, Kerry. And one last thought. Earlier in the program, I talked about the 10-80-10. The 10% of people who will do what they're told to do, the 80% who are good people, and then there's 10% who really want to make a difference. The women and men who are watching this today on their own time, on their own dime, the women and men who will follow up and listen to TLC and practice this stuff and change their way of behavior, that's the 10% that are going to change the future of American law enforcement. And we've got to do that.
I agree with you completely, and thank you for that. Any other last bits of wisdom before we bring this podcast to a close?
Yes, just one last thought. Without the public trust, we have nothing. Mm-hmm. And nationally, there's a lot of questions about public trust in law enforcement. I think the minority of people who don't like us is being heard more clearly than the majority of people who do like us. But every contact we make is an opportunity to let the public know how good we are at what we do and why we do everything at the highest levels of ethics and integrity. And if we have anybody in the organization that's not practicing that, then maybe they're on the wrong line of work. And as leaders in this organization, we need to address them proactively.
I completely agree with you on that. And I've always said that, the patrol officers and the firefighters and the medics are out there. You're in the same position with having to always keep that public trust. It's not just a law enforcement issue; it's a public safety issue. And every contact that you have with people, with the public, you're going to be the topic of dinner table conversation. Not the chief of police, not the chief of the fire department, not the head of the EMS unit. You, and how you treat the public is so critical, and making sure that you make really good decisions and treat people well.
Yep. So. And one group that gets omitted all too often. I had a woman come up to me yesterday with a smile on her face, so I knew that she was going to say something smart. She said, "I'm just a dispatcher. I'm just a dispatcher." And she said it because I have practiced this. I'm so fed up with that. That's the first point of contact. And all too often we treat them as second-class citizens. That's the first point of contact that our public has. 911, what's the nature of your emergency? They're setting the tone for the rest of this. They're the women and men they can make or break the entire incident. One favor I ask of all the people out in the street: close the loop with your dispatchers. Close the loop. When the call is finished, give them a call and let them know how it ended up. That's the big thing. And I don't want to bore you with this. When I was a kid, I was in the San Francisco Boys Chorus as a kid. And my lead singing instructor was a woman they called Mady Bacon. And she was from New York, lived in an apartment. She, like everybody in New York lives in an apartment. And she says, if you ever want to drive your neighbors nuts, sing a song and don't finish it. Sing a song and don't finish it. Get right to the last line and don't finish it. It'll drive people nuts. And that's where dispatchers are. They do this. How did it end up? Close the loop with employees and thank them for their good work day in and day out.
Excellent point. And that's easy to overlook as you rush off to the next call. But the consideration that you show is, I've done that before with dispatchers, and they love getting the love because they don't get a lot of it. So yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that.
I hope you found a lot of great value in this episode of the De-Escalation Conversations podcast. Please be sure to go to our website, theidea.world, THEIDEA.world. On that website, just click on the link that resonates with you most. If you're a K-12 educator, if you're a firefighter, medical services, law enforcement, flight attendants, whatever industry you're in, we have specialized training for you. So check that training out, because literally it can save your life, it can save your relationship, it can save your career. So check out theidea.world. And I'll look forward to seeing you soon. Take care. This is Kerry Mintz here, and thanks for watching this episode of the De-Escalation Conversations podcast. I hope you got some great insights that you can use right away. But don't stop here. Click that video link above and keep the momentum going with another powerful episode. And hey, if you haven't already, please hit that like button and the subscribe bell so you never miss an episode. New strategies, new stories, and new ways to connect coming your way every week. See you in the next episode.